Now, we will go rather quickly over Victorian drama. Although a number of academics have tried to argue the case for very minor playwrights, there is no escaping the fact that from the days of Sheridan to those of Oscar Wilde, English drama suffered a long eclipse. Only playwrights with an Irish background could somehow take the relay from Irishman Sheridan. There seems to be a sort of long-term historical logic in that. So, Oscar Wilde. Oscar Wilde really resurrected the English stage with his drawing room comedies. You could also call them comedies of society, plays of the 1880s. He has already been mentioned, of course, for his novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray, an absolute classic of world literature. But Wilde was also a poet, essayist, and writer of wonderful tales, including tales for children, by the way. But he was indeed and fundamentally a wit, and this is what dazzles in his comedies. They are quintessentially witty. They are built around a secret. It can be a state secret or the secret of a mysterious birth or disappearance. These comedies offer a disillusioned evocation of late Victorian society with, you might even call it satire, waspish satire. So you had Lady Windermere's Fan, a woman of no importance, the most famous one, The Importance of Being Earnest, and An Ideal Husband. Each of these plays brought him triumph after triumph and international fame. Standing before the curtain after the play, answering the general applause of the upper classes he had just ridiculed, Wilde once famously said that he had to thank them for their performance. You see the joke. Just as with Sheridan lampooning late Georgian society, it seemed the late Victorian establishment had a sort of decadent appetite for laughing at themselves. Yet, as it is well known, certain segments of the establishment reminded Oscar Wilde that there were limits, and Wilde crashed from the height of fame to police court and jail in 1895. He had to serve 2 years hard labour in Reading jail for his love affair with Lord Alfred Douglas. Homosexuality was then illegal in England at the time, and probably as married man, a society figure, Wilde had taken a mad gamble in initiating himself libel proceedings against Douglas's father. But we won't go into the details of the case. Suffice it to say that Wilde decided to stay in England when in fact he could have had the opportunity to flee to France, where he would have been safe. But he preferred to stay, and maybe there is an element of self-destructiveness in this, confirmed in his last years in exile, and also perhaps confirmed in his last play, Salome. Daring, very original, decadent play. It was first written in French, but it was never staged in England until 1931. It's with Salome, you're almost entering the 20th century, and it was famously made into an opera by Richard Strauss in 1906. So again, another signal that British culture, English literature in particular, was in tune with what was going on in the rest of Europe, and the rest of Europe had an interest in what was going on in England, especially England, but I would say Britain and even in Ireland as well at the time. Talking about Ireland, we're going to talk about another Irishman, George Bernard Shaw. We had at the time, yes, maybe I could also mention great actors and great stage directors. Henry Irving and the Lyceum Theatre in London. I think I have already mentioned him as being one of the possible models for Dracula. Okay, but nothing great came until George Bernard Shaw. He's a playwright brimming with verve, wit and humour. From his youth onwards, Shaw adhered to socialism, contrary to, well, Oscar Wilde also claimed he was a socialist, but I don't know if that was very serious. With Bernard Shaw, there is kind of okay, sincere socialism. Anyway, he wanted to be a man of action and a thinker. He's got an ambition along those lines. So his comedies are mainly thesis plays. They almost always are preceded by long prefaces, giving precision as to the meaning and the significance. Okay, he was also a great friend of Samuel Butler, whom we have already mentioned, the great debunker of the previous generation. So for George Bernard Shaw, the stage was a sort of platform from which he could denounce Victorian hypocrisies and the fallacies of bourgeois conformism with iconoclastic vigor. Yeah, okay, let's call it that. In fact, I would dispute that because, he doesn't really touch a raw nerve, whereas maybe Oscar Wilde had touched a few raw nerves. So, he wrote a long list of plays, and his career went on into the 20th century. Among the early ones, Arms and the Man, Candida, and You Never Can Tell. The one you're most likely to know perhaps is Pygmalion, but that's the 20th century really. This ended up as a Hollywood musical, My Fair Lady. So you see, again, Shaw thought of himself as a sort of rebel against society, but at the end of the day he became quite respectable. Probably more interesting and really challenging are the stage productions of two great Irish poets, Yeats and Synge. Soon to experiment with Japanese Noh and to launch the Abbey Theatre in Dublin, 1904, with Florence Farr, a leading West End actress, and his lifelong friend and playwright herself, Lady Augusta Gregory, William Butler Yeats had already written plays based on Irish legend and mythology, but also with an avant-garde treatment. This is, for instance, the case with the Countess Kathleen and the Land of Heart's Desire. In 1899, Yeats, Lady Gregory, Edward Martyn, and George Moore, the novelist, had already set up the Irish Literary Theatre, and they had published a manifesto. In this manifesto, it was stated very clearly, "We hope to find in Ireland an uncorrupted and imaginative audience, trained to listen by its passion for oratory, and that freedom to experiment which is not found in the theatres of England, and without which no new movement in art or literature can succeed." You see here again this appetite for going away, though Ireland is not that far from Britain, but yet it's different. It's somehow new. You see, there is this overall idea that England is tired, that everything is jaded at the end of the Victorian era. Then we have John Millington Synge. It's spelled Synge, but it's pronounced Sing, actually. He was about to provide the Abbey Theatre with great plays, both highly poetic ones and somehow traditional, such as Deirdre of the Sorrows, beautiful tragic play, but also experimental and modernistic ones, truly original and contributing something truly new. I must quote the Playboy of the Western World. This one actually triggered a riot when it was first staged. Read it and maybe you'll understand why. Nothing in England at the time, nothing in Ireland either, was likely to do the same. So with those Irish playwrights, Yeats and Synge, we have, I think, really truly new material, again pointing towards the 20th century.